Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 94. Today we've got a real treat for you in terms of progress. We've got all kinds of stuff going on. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, working on the Cetorhinus capital vessel builds. All of our efforts in this episode are going to be focused on the superstructure that's above the hangar, and specifically this side section. We're going to talk about that briefly, and then we're going to work on the forward section, working towards the bridge. Now, when I put together this part of the superstructure in the last episode, I was not necessarily super thrilled with the transition. We've got this long sort of section that sits over top of the arm that goes around the side of the hangar, and then we have this transition to the angled portion that's kind of extending forward and then also bending towards the middle of the ship. It just wasn't working for me, and one of the ideas that came to mind that would be potentially really good at concealing that transition would be to have these sort of ribs on the side of the superstructure that stick out just a little bit, and because they're there, you won't see the transition sticking out nearly so easily. So that was kind of the idea. I'd seen this done on other ships in the past, and I thought it looked really sharp, but I've never really thought about it at a time when I was in a position to incorporate it on a build until now. So we're putting in these very low profile sort of things, and when combined with a little bit of thoughtful texturing and coloring, I am hopeful that these will add just that subtle but really impactful visual detail that will go a long way to elevate the overall sense that a person gets about the design of the ship when they look at it. And you can see here, we just tweaked that first one that we did to make it a little bit more low profile. The transition on the left side of that rib, you can barely see it, is a lot less visible now because it's the rib is elevated, so you don't see those points sticking up out of the transition. There were just a couple of little angular points sticking up based on the way the blocks came together. Now that we've got the design for these ribs, it's very, very easy to duplicate them. You'll see we're going to end up doing 3 of them at once. Basically just pick a block, copy it down all 3, pick another block, copy it down all 3. Very, very simple, very, very easy. It's not a difficult thing to do conceptually or design-wise, and it's not a difficult thing to build. It's just one of those things, in my case, where I had to think of doing it at a time when it made sense to do it, and then reap the benefits. That's all it takes. So you can see we've got the 3 on the go. Pick a block, copy it to all 3, pick another block, continue. So in terms of design features, I kind of get the feeling that this specific kind of feature, these ribs or fillets or whatever you want to call them, are going to appear elsewhere on the ship as well before we're done. But for now, you can see, very understated, very, very simple, but they just add a little something, a little bit of a detail that elevates the whole section of the ship, makes it look a whole lot more interesting. So with that having been done, I took a little bit of a pause from the recording and I duplicated the superstructure over to the other side. I hadn't done the ribs on the other side yet, but I did the superstructure because with me not using mirror mode when I'm building, the larger and the more complicated a build gets before I start trying to transfer it over to another side, the more likely I'm going to start making a lot of mistakes and wasting a lot of time, first of all, figuring out what mistakes I made and then fixing them. It's just one of those things that I've learned. So in this case, as large as this superstructure might be, it still wasn't overly complicated to the point where making it transfer over to the other side was something that was filled with a lot of mistakes. In fact, it actually went very, very smoothly. And now, with the largest section of that superstructure being done, it makes it a lot easier to do these transitional bits in towards the center of the ship, where we're going to have basically, I keep calling it a hallway because it's a gigantic square tube that extends from just above the hangar, or sorry, just above the front of the ship in the hangar, to the bridge. And it's a little bit difficult to try and make that transition if we didn't first set it up with a little bit of bulk and a little bit of mass moving towards it from either side. If you think in the terms of like a person with 2 arms reaching around the hangar and holding onto it, it's not just two arms with no joint connecting them to the torso somewhere. You've got shoulders, you've got things going around that add a little bit of mass and a little bit of detail. Maybe it's because we anthropomorphize things that it just makes a lot of sense to have shoulder-like transitions in this part of the hull to me, but that's what makes sense to me right now, is to have these transitions that resemble in some ways the idea of shoulders transitioning from the arms reaching around the side of the hanger to the neck, and then the neck extending forward to the bridge, which is the head. You get the idea, hopefully. If not, it'll be a little bit more clear before the video is over. And we're doing so now. Everything that I'm doing is in such compact, small pieces. It's really, really super easy to duplicate it across to the other side. Every time I finish something and I'm happy with it, I duplicate it across to the other side, and then we move on to the next piece. So you can see we've got a little bit of a transition that makes some sort of sense to label it a shoulder. Possibly, depending on how you're looking at it. And now we're going to do one more that's very similar to that before we make the final sort of transition to the gigantic square hallway. And what we'll end up with is hopefully something that's a little bit more interesting than if we had just done a transition straight across from where we finished off the superstructure last episode to this square tube that extends forward. I thought it would look kind of just silly. Very, very silly. If you remember the photo that I showed of the basking shark in the first episode, because Cetorhinus, as you may have heard, is part of Cetorhinus maximus, which is the name for the basking shark, which is a gigantic shark that has a gigantic mouth and no teeth. But it has this really weird nose. It's very long and narrow and pointy, and relative to the size of the rest of the shark, it looks absolutely ridiculous. So I wanted to avoid that as much as possible, but at the same time, it would make sense if we had something similar to that on this ship, because it's named after this shark that has this proboscis instead of a snout. So you can see now, this is where we're starting to build in that square sort of hallway, and then we can make some adjustments now and later from the aesthetic point of view, but structurally we're just kind of getting this in place so that we can see how it fits relative to the details that we've already built around it. And you can see just a little bit of extra detail to the side of this square tube that we're building. When it goes a long way to make it a little bit more believable as a structural element that's not ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's the thing that's been in the back of my head since I started doing this, is that if we're not very careful about how we handle the front section, it's just going to look ridiculous. So if we can avoid that in some way with the details that lead up to it, with the details that we incorporate into it directly, then that's a pretty good idea. And you can see we've done basically half of that now. So if we duplicate it, now you understand possibly a little bit better what I was talking about with the square hallway, the giant square hallway. And we did a little bit of a detail along the top corners. We put the 45-degree angle block, and we're going to incorporate that in the bottom corners as well, just for a little something right now. I'm very tempted to rework it with 22.5-degree angles in various different places, but I'm not committing to that right now because it's just a very vague idea in the back of my mind, and it could be one of those things that turns into a mess in an awful hurry. But quick and easy to just knock the corners off, make it look a little bit more refined. You can see now towards the back of the ship, we've got a lot of space and a lot of things to do. This is our old capital vessel that I've been slowly but steadily stripping for combat steel blocks. I think I might get enough out of it to finish the front section of the Cetorhinus. I don't think I'm going to be able to get enough out of it to finish the ship overall, which is fine. I've got a reasonable supply of iron that's only increasing day by day. So for now, I'm going to let you watch the rest of this. We're just going to fill in some of the details as the hallway stretches down a little bit and then flattens out so that it's not blocking the hangar at all towards the bridge. In the next episode, we're going to be working exclusively in this area, the bridge itself and the hallway leading to it. We aren't going to do too much of the aesthetic detailing inside, but we're just going to get it structurally complete so that it's ready for the next wave of revisions. And then once that's done, we're going to start shifting our attention towards the back of the ship and finishing that off. We've got a lot of thrusters that we still have to find places for and incorporate into the build in other places as well. But we're getting close. We're getting very, very close. Soon we'll have another capital vessel and the blueprint that goes with it. So if you want to be notified about the next episode and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.